Okay, I want to welcome everybody to the session. We are very excited to have Victoria Clare with us, and also a person who's helping her with her slides, Robin Watson. Art and I had the privilege last September when we were in Manchester to see a presentation by Victoria, and we said to her, "You just have to come to our conference and give a presentation." Victoria has an honorary PhD from Greater Manchester University, and she's now a PhD candidate, and I hear she's almost done in professional practice. She has created over 250 sculptures, and you probably see one of them on your screen, and she's done many, many solo exhibitions. So I'm not going to say more now because I think a lot of it will come out as you talk and as we ask you questions. And we also will try at the end to leave time for audience participation. So, Victoria, take it away.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. And before I even begin, I just want to say what an absolute honour it was to meet both you and Art last September. It really was. And I just feel really super lucky to even have the opportunity to speak at this wonderful event. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Yes, I've got an honorary doctorate of arts for the public contribution within the UK. So that was quite an accolade for me back in 2024. I'm also a fine arts lecturer at the University of Greater Manchester, and as well as that, I kind of dip my toe in and out of visiting lecturer with psychology, which is, as you'll see, will weave together as the presentation sort of continues. My research as a PhD student has reinforced what I'm about to claim, if you like, here today. So this whole talk is about sculpture, and sculpture being a vessel for autoethnography. So in my own experience of 30 years of being a creative practitioner, but also the duality of me losing my sight over those 30 years, which is quite ironic and quite uncanny, as I chose 30 years ago to follow the beautiful pathway of sculpture, and it being something that is a very sensory and tactile medium of work. When I was first introduced to sculpture, I was 17. My progressive sight loss started when I was 19. So when I was 17, I had all my vision. I might have had a few little kind of unknown problems at night time, but it wasn't a known thing at that time. And I was actually training to be a graphic designer, mainly because back in those days, that was pretty much the only way commercially to go if you wanted to involve yourself within the arts. But I purely fell in love with sculpture by accident because there happened to be a book in the library that was sitting on the shelf. It hadn't been put away, and there was wood carving, and there was me just absolutely spilling myself into this book and just finding it one of the most interesting things I've ever seen. So with that, and knowing me back in those days, which was a little bit of a rebel, shall we say, I chose to create a sculpture out of wood for my final major project. I was very much told, don't do it. This is too much of a gamble. You've got a graphic design place hanging in the wings, but nevertheless, I did it anyway. And I'm glad I did it. It was a good risk to take because I got distinction. And of course, I found my love of sculpture as well. By the age of 19, I was diagnosed with a rare degenerative disease called retinitis pigmentosa. I had no idea what that even meant when I was told it. And as a young 19-year-old, standing literally at the beginning of the rest of my life as an adult, everything just fell away from me within that moment of being told I was going to go blind. Everything I thought I was going to do felt unreachable. I didn't know what my future lied. I didn't know how I was going to even be in the world as a blind person. So as you can imagine, that was quite a trauma, should we say. And I think trauma is very weaved into the work that I do now in terms of celebrating the resilience and the strength with which I found through the trauma that I received with sight loss. So that's just a little bit of my background for you. I'm going to move on to slide 1 with creative practice. So on this slide, we'll have 2 sculptures. The first is entitled Beautiful Hesitance. Now, I've chosen 4 sculptures to show you today that are specifically picked for the evocative narrative that lies within them. My journey of sight loss has sat so beautifully, entangled and weaved along with my creative practice. As a young woman, I didn't know how to articulate my feelings at all about what was happening to me. The only way I could do that was to actually sculpt. And that is how creative practice, I believe, is a vessel for autoethnography. It allows one to articulate oneself when you can't find the words, even though they might be deep within our bodies. Sometimes you just can't articulate them. Beautiful Hesitance, at the time when it was created, which was 2018, was quite a informal time in terms of my creative practice, as I was kind of, I suppose, coming in and coming out of exhibiting and doing commissions. This particular piece was a commission. It was seen by a lady that actually really enjoyed a piece of my work in an exhibition. The dove in flight, in its stance, I believe, shows the hesitance within the piece. It's not sure whether it wants to fly or whether it wants to land. It's very, very hesitant. And at that time of my sight loss journey, I was going into more severity with my sight loss. And I didn't really understand what that meant, what the next stage of sight loss would hold for me for my future. And the piece Beautiful Hesitance, I believe, is just full of that evocative narrative, the story with which I was going through at the time. The next piece is called A Sense of Belonging. Now, A Sense of Belonging, once again, is a very evocative piece. It shares the narrative of myself and a dear friend who literally stood by my side and talked me off a ledge, if you will. Back in 2020, I received probably the worst rapid deterioration thus far with my sight loss. It was, of course, COVID, where we were all launched into lockdown. And I had my own personal lockdown with my current situation of losing more vision. So how I see isn't really how the word see should describe it. It's a perception. I have no percent of vision other than when I can see light and movement. It's like walking in a very, very thick white fog. And at that time, it was a very vulnerable time for us all in COVID. But then to be going through that at the same time was an incredible isolating and suffocating feeling. I felt alone. I felt there was nobody that understood what I was going through. But this friend, who happens to be somebody that does live in the States, was an incredible support to me. She also is a blind lady, and she supported me through that time. And I wanted to create a sculpture that was really dedicated to her, but articulated how having somebody that can just walk beside your pathway can be really helpful in a hard time. So that's what A Sense of Belonging holds within that piece. On the next slide, we've got 2 more works of art. We've got a piece here called A Vision of Life. again, created in 2020. I was creating a collection of work at that time during COVID, and at the same time as losing that kind of final part of sight loss. And a vision of life is basically about my inquiry into my self-development, because I couldn't really understand what this empty sense I was feeling was. All I knew is it was like a void in my body that I couldn't understand. So the best thing for me to do as a creative is to go into the studio and see what comes from that. And through that, this piece of work developed. It actually articulates maternal instinct and the fact that I could never have children due to the genetics of RP. So I made a choice quite early on in my 20s not to have children. But I received a part of, I guess, a part of my life where I was engaging with children and yet reflecting that I'd never had my own. So I found that quite difficult around that time. The piece depicts an eye, and within the eye is a suspended pupil. And within that pupil is a fetus of a baby. And it is entitled A Vision of Life, because I wanted to rewrite the narrative. But the rewriting of that narrative didn't come until 2022, when I'd done a lot of therapy and a lot of self-discovery and inquiry about my own feelings. So initially it was about a sadness, but I've rewrote that narrative so that it's actually trying to portray that actually the future lies within the young people of today, the vision of life. And the last piece I'd like to share with you, once again, is an incredibly evocative narrative behind it. Firstly, the material. So the material is applewood, and that very tree was the tree that I used to climb in my parents' home, which they still live at the same place. So I'm now 50, they've lived there for 50 years. I used to climb this particular tree and play in it, and I used to build things in it like a tree house and stuff. And to use that wood that I actually climbed as a child, it couldn't have been any more perfect, to be fair, for this particular piece. The piece is called Inner Child. I was doing a lot of work around that time about inquiring into who I was, who my inner child was, as we all have one. And I wanted to portray that through the work. So as you can imagine, using that material that already held in an embodied knowledge, the memory of my childhood, was the most perfect piece of material I could have ever used. So there's 4 pieces. As Carolyn has said, I do actually have many more. I think I'd be here all day if I tried to explain them all. But I chose these 4 for their particular evocative narrative. Embodied cognition and embodied knowledge has been something that I've travelled into really through blindness, but knowledgeless. I knowledgeless of that. I didn't know what embodied knowledge was at that time. However, that was how I was living. As you lose your sight, you have to adapt over and over. So one progression comes, and then you just get used to one progression, and then the next progression comes. So if you can imagine, that's like a wave of a crest that just keeps on crashing and keeps on crashing, which is actually part of complex PTSD. And that's been a journey in itself. But the beauty of having post-traumatic stress disorder is there is potential for post-traumatic growth. And I speak very strongly in my PhD about this. My post-traumatic growth has led me to the point of acceptance of my blindness. When you are receiving something that is progressive, it feels like you're losing a part of yourself. There is a grief so deep. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, within her book Death and Dying, speaks of the 5 stages of grief: denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. Now, there also is a scholar entitled Sonia Baus. She has spoken quite strongly again about the links with visual impairment and how that relates to the 5 stages of grief. And I've received those 5 stages of grief on a repetitive time zone, to be fair, and at different points as well. You don't necessarily have them all in that order. But the beauty of that is there is a story within grief itself. There is a deep understanding and a journey within grief, which is why we're here today, to talk about that personal narrative of storytelling. So there is another layer to autoethnography within my storytelling, not just through my artwork, but through the sight loss itself. So once I understood what the mechanics of what was happening to me was actually happening, I then began to dig deep inside of myself to find a way of turning it into something that was positive, which ultimately ends up in being post-traumatic growth. Embodied cognition is something that is such an important part of how I live within the world. My embodied knowledge informs who I am, where I am, and how I can interact with the world. It's one that I never understood. I didn't know I was doing. I now understand that fully. David Pye, Tim Ingold, Merleau-Ponty all speak of embodied knowledge being held within us. Our memories are embodied knowledge. And once again, what would autoethnography be without the embodied knowledge of memory? The act of doing becomes the act of remembering. That's where the creative practice holds its hand. Creative practice is very much an action of doing. This is how I've been able to transform how I create my work as a sighted person that once was into a blind person creating artwork. Because I had the knowledge and the memory of having the action of sculpting when I could see, that's then held in my body. And that has been the transformation as a blind person to then be able to articulate myself still through my body, using every part of me to create work. My senses obviously play a huge way with which I create my work as well. Obviously, the sense of the haptic touch is probably my most strongest tool, but also the senses of sound, the sense of smell, even taste, even the stance with which I stand when I'm creating, even holding the tool in my hand in the left whilst I have a mallet in the right, and I can feel the resistance of the wood, the smoothness, the grain, and what that material is telling me whilst I'm sculpting. I didn't sculpt like that as a sighted person, but now I have all this beautiful knowledge as a blind person when I create. I feel so much more fulfilled. I feel I have more skill as a blind artist than I ever did as a sighted artist. My academic work has really opened up my mind in terms of the understanding of my framework that I have just designed. This framework is called PEG, perceive through the remaining senses, engage through embodied knowledge and give meaning through emotional and visceral responses. I teach this framework to fine art students and also community groups through a workshop. Now, this workshop is very unique. I blindfold my participants. I use clay as the medium for which they can articulate themselves. And they are asked to sit in 10 minutes of contemplation in a blindfold in the blind space, just to get used to what is happening within their bodies. We, as sighted people, use information through our vision over 80%, which doesn't leave very much for the rest of our senses at all. Obviously, for me, I think it's very much around the other way. And this workshop is one of those ways for which sighted people can use the rest of their senses in a much more stronger way than they ever did before. By taking the ocular dominance of vision away, it allows oneself to not be distracted by vision and really concentrate on those other senses. But when I speak of the senses, I speak of the perception of the 4 remaining senses, but also the whole knowledge of our embodied senses, how we can turn what we feel through our hands into an understanding within our bodies, the physical sensation, the somatic response. If something feels hot, is it cold? Is it smooth? Is it hard? From that information, we then transform and give meaning. What does that mean to us? What does this sculpture that feels so smooth, where does that take me in my emotions? And an emotional, visceral response often appears. Now, that's happened not just through my workshop, but through my exhibitions as well, which I'll talk about in just a little while. But the workshop itself is taught throughout with a blindfold. They are then articulating their feelings. They're not asked to objectify, to create something good, but they're asked to create something honest from within themselves. Once the blindfolds are removed, we then create a really interesting group discussion, lots of laughter, lots of tears sometimes too, because emotions will prevail. And it's a really interesting and strong way of looking at how we as humans interact, not just with ourselves and with other people, but with material and with the environment. Now, this framework, hopefully, fingers crossed, will be used as a pedagogical tool going forward in academia. I'm working really hard at the moment within fine arts and psychology, education, and the health sectors. I'm delivering it in November in Denmark at a congress. And also a colleague is putting me in touch with mental health, who will be helping me get it into that field as well. So there's lots of different cohorts that it will work with. So I'm really excited about that. But it all comes from my experience, my lived experience of sight loss. My actual exhibitions have also evolved. And back in 2018, I created an exhibition called Blinder Sixth Sense. I was the first artist in the UK to ever place sculpture into a completely pitch black gallery space. And then I invited the public to interpret the work using their other senses. This was an incredible success. And recently I've just done it again. The title was different this time. It was called The Sense of Sculpture. It was a completely different collection of work, but it also had a very academic feel to it because obviously it was part of my PhD. I wrote feedback forms and got everybody to kind of give their thoughts and their experience of the exhibition in the dark space. So then I could use that as data going forward to analyse. But now blind space exhibitions is also another framework with which I'm proposing. So going forward, I would like to be able to give it to other institutions and galleries with my consultancy and use it as a curatorial way of putting on exhibitions, because it doesn't just allow people into the blind world. It's more about how they can integrate their lives as sighted people by using some of the beauty of blindness, if that makes sense. So, as you can imagine, my story is evolving all the time, as everybody's is. I have had such a wonderful career within creative practice. I now very, very much look forward to an academic career going forward. Creative practice runs through my veins, just like my blood. It has been the very vessel for which I'm here today to talk to you about autoethnography. So I'm really proud to be here as a blind woman advocating for other visually impaired people. But actually, I'm always open to actually sharing experiences with sighted people to actually make them have a greater understanding of who they are, what they feel, and where they could place themselves in the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. That was just incredible, amazing. I'm so appreciative and so happy for you to be here. And I know you can't see it, but there are several people, including I saw uh, several people I know go through with hearts, throwing them at you. Tony, Ron Pilius. So you're getting a whole lot of very positive, heartfelt response to your
Thank you.
presentation.
Thank you.
And I want to add my heartfelt appreciation to you and respect and just love for your talent and your heart and how you put it all together.
Thank
And
you.
all that you have to teach us, both people who are not sighted and those of us who are sighted. So thank you. I have so many thoughts from listening to you, but one is just, how we in autoethnography might learn to call on more of our senses in writing. And you've, of course, given us many hints about, viewing art in the dark and also being blindfolded as we experience artwork. And I'm wondering if we should do that as autoethnographers. I mean, I've always thought of the process of introspection as being not just, the memory of what you saw, but also the memory of, what you felt, what you smelled, what you heard.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you have any further hints for autoethnographers about how they might be able to incorporate more of their senses in their work, because I think that is very important.
Yeah. Well, obviously, my PhD, the methodology for me is autoethnography. So, of course, I've had to kind of put myself in that frame in that way to articulate, my journey, if you like. But I think the greatest gift is just to stand in stillness and just be present. Allow the moment to feel the wind on your face or the light or the softness of, like what you're holding or where you're sitting, or, just engage in your surroundings, but engage with your feelings as well. So allow the perception of your senses to inform what's happening inside your body. Because I think it's really easy in the world that we live. We're running around all the time, aren't we? We're so fast, we're so quick. And I think that's half the problem. I think that we all need to slow down, to slow everything down so that we can give ourselves the opportunity to feel really internally and allow the perception of our senses to inform our bodies. Because I think it paints such a more in-depth picture. You know, I've just written a conclusion to the PhD, actually, which is, it's interesting because I start the PhD with an evocative personal narrative, which is set on a beach. I end the conclusion with the personal narrative, which is again set at the beach. So it's like a full circle moment, but the outcome is very different, you know, from the introduction, which is full of sadness and heartbreak, to the conclusion, which is full of love and life, and to articulate the senses with the wind and the sea and the sounds and the feelings and the memories, I think gives a richer understanding of somebody's personal lived experience.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Just one more short point, and then I'll let Art ask a few questions, and we'll turn it over to the audience. But, you know, as you were talking about having a progressive disease, I flashed back to taking care of my first partner who had emphysema, and when I wrote about it, I called it a progressive plateau disease because you would, you know, he would deteriorate and things were really frustrating and horrible and chaotic. And then we would adapt. We'd figure out how to adapt to that plateau.
Yeah.
And hope it would stay there. But of course, it never does. It drops. And then you hope, well, maybe it'll come back. You know, maybe it'll come back. And then you realize you're just living a chaotic, frustrating life because the plateau has dropped and you haven't adapted to it.
No.
So I was identifying, even though it wasn't my body that this was happening to, I was the caregiver, but I was identifying with what it must have been like for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the 5 stages of grief have just played such an important role in my journey, you know, because it's denial initially, then you're angry about what's happening, you know, God, why isn't it bad enough I've lost this amount of vision, but now I'm losing more amount of vision, you know, so you go through anger. Then you go for the bargaining of, oh God, what if I'd have taken those supplements, or what if I'd have done more exercise, you know, all of that kind of questioning in your mind. And then of course you do hit depression because it's inevitable and you have to allow yourself to feel the sadness of the loss. But eventually the acceptance does come. But interestingly for me, and something that I've wrote about in my PhD, is that I believe that someone that is suffering not just sight loss, but maybe something that, as you just said, Carolyn, something that is progressive, I don't think that you can ever truly reach acceptance of that progression until you've reached the end game of it, you know, until that progression doesn't exist anymore and you've hit that last degree of it, then I think acceptance truly comes. And I only say this because, you know, 30 years of progression for me, and it's only really been the last 5 years that I've really found that acceptance within my sight loss.
Thank you. Art, do you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yes, a couple of points and questions. First of all, thank you for this absolutely wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I think you've put in perspective so much of your experience and communicated it so well. And it's very moving. And that was my impression when I saw your presentation last September. at the conference. One of the things that really struck me, touched me really, was how comfortable you were with yourself on the stage there with a sizable audience, talking about your work, sharing it. And the other thing that really struck me, watching very closely what was happening at that conference, was the supportive community in the program that you're in the PhD program. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about two things. One is how you found autoethnography and that program, and how important that support community has been in the work that you've done. Because it really struck me as a really rich experience for all the people who were there in different ways, and unlike any that I've encountered in the many, many places that we've been to talk about autoethnography.
Yeah, well, initially I have to say I was in my first engagement with the university itself was purely by accident, to be fair. I was at another conference speaking, and I sat at a dinner at a table with the ex-Vice Chancellor, Georgie Holmes. We both shared the love of sculpture. I didn't realise he did. He started speaking of somebody that is one of my icons, Barbara Hepworth. Of course, we just hit it off, and he kind of said at the end of the evening, you'll be hearing from me. So he was a man of his word, and I did hear from him 6 weeks later, and that's when I received the offer of my honorary doctorate, which obviously blew me away. But it wasn't just that; it was the opportunity to engage with the university that came as well. So I started working at the university within fine arts. My boss, Sam Johnson, incredibly supportive lady, introduced me to Professor Jerome Carson. And that is where autoethnography was discovered. Obviously, he studied it, and obviously he's one of the champions of it, isn't he? So he felt that my experience, my career could be transferred and transformed into a PhD, which at the time I couldn't quite get my head around it, because I was very much, no, I'm not an academic, I'm a creative, but he saw potential. He must have seen something in me that he believed in, and I was put onto the doctorate program, which I never would have thought could happen to me. And I've learned so much about autoethnography, majorly, to be honest, from yourselves. I've studied you both, and I think meeting you both was such an extra for me, because it put everything that I was reading into context, if that makes sense. But with regards to the university, it's one of the most supportive places I've ever known. And I think that's really important as well, not just with somebody that's got a disability, but just as somebody that's come all the way from, the southeast of England and travels up to the north of England. And, I didn't know anybody, but it soon channeled itself into a network of really good supportive people, which, has just been a blessing for me,
Well, that's something that really came across to us when we were visiting with you and your cohorts and the faculty there last year. And so often what we found is people contact us, Carolyn or me or both of us, having started to do autoethnography, being attracted to it, and not having that kind of support, actually having more critics than supporters.
Yeah.
And it was so refreshing. I can't begin to express how refreshing it was to be in that atmosphere.
Yeah,
So thank you for
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
And I think we should give some time for others to respond or ask Victoria questions.
Okay, if you would put your hands up, and in the meantime, I will read some comments that are in chat for you, Victoria.
Okay,
Uh,
thank you.
One, this made me want to start making sculptures. A second,
Excellent.
yeah, so beautiful and emotionally stirring. Thank you so much for sharing. I was truly moved.
Thank you.
Third, thank you very much for sharing your story, art, and research. And the fourth one, wonderful talk. I am particularly moved as Victoria's work makes me recall a friend of mine, Marisha Ryman, who grew up partially sighted. I followed her in her autoethnographic journey in the work, My Vision, Words Without Borders. So this person is the author, I believe. I
Mm,
find in both Victoria's and Maria's stories amazing beauty and strength. Thank you.
thank you so much.
And then, so Robin says she will share these with you, but I'll read one more. Ron Pilia says, thank you so much for your powerful work. I'm sitting here wondering if you might speak to the notion of permanence as you now move toward a completed piece and how that might compare for you to a written piece.
Yes.
Do I need to read that again, or how
Yeah.
you, yes, how you, if you could speak to the notion of permanence as
Mm.
you move toward a completed piece and how that might compare for you to a written piece. So you could start there.
Yeah, I think the notion of permanence actually came into my mind this morning when I was speaking, as I often do, practicing in the mirror or whatever. And the idea of it came in my mind because I thought to myself, actually, those of us that are artists that create something at the end of what we're doing, as in something that you can feel, something that you can touch, that's what sculpture is about. It's about engaging with the piece and the story that the piece holds within itself, I think, is a legacy going forward, because that permanency of what the artist has felt whilst creating it will go forward for as long as the artwork is in the environment, for many, many years. Whether it will mean the same thing is a very good question, because everybody has their own articulation. A piece of work that I've created will have its own story, but I have noticed more and more that as people touch my work and engage with the work, they have their own sense, they have their own embodied experience, they have their own meaning of what it is for them. So the permanency of the artist may fade in time due to the subjectiveness of sculpture, which actually I find a really beautiful transition, because that means that it's supporting someone through what they're going through or what they can, kind of get from that piece of work. In terms of my future, with the writing, it is a very it has a duality, it has a similarity, because obviously I'm articulating the feelings but through the medium of words. So where words, I couldn't find the words when I was creating the sculpture, but the sculpture found the words for me. Whereas this time I'm finding the words, and that's through a lot of therapy, that's through a lot of personal inquiry and discovery. And I am actually able to find those words to articulate through, my scholarly academia. But it is again, from a permanency perspective, that won't change, because I guess the narrative is there on the page, whereas the narrative of the feelings of the artist isn't there in the sculpture because of the interaction of the, you know, the public engagement. They bring to the table their own feelings. So it's a slightly different thing. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 people who would like to ask a question. Ralph, you want to begin?
Yes, thanks very much, Carolyn. Thanks very much, Victoria, for your contribution, perspective, and insights, which really makes me think about art different and open some worlds to further engage with it with language. Just picking up your last lead,
Yeah.
and following up Carolyn's really interesting question. Which you started before. How can we enable the autoethnography community to work with the other senses? Is there a way how we can generalize this? Is there a possibility where we can give methodologies out? Because really, I mean, as you said before, and I'm a visual artist myself, this is such a central organ and a sense we are working with, but we're missing out. We are missing so much
100%.
out.
Yeah.
And how can we bring this back? Could you kind of like, maybe through your experience, could you kind of like give us some tools or some methods?
Come to my PEG framework workshop.
I guess just perhaps like in a bigger sense as well. You know, how can we weave this into autoethnography? Because I mean, I saw, for instance, a clip of like a British tourist couple being in a hotel in Dubai where a drone was coming in, and and we all know these images, and well, you don't, but most of us do. But what was really striking in that one comment of that, fortunately nobody was injured there, was like the smell, because the person said it stank of kerosene or it stank of oil, something like this.
Right. Okay.
And just that sense suddenly go like, wow, this must have been such a, imagine being like in this traumatized, suddenly a drone comes into your hotel room, and the most important thing was like the smell. And this angle, can we kind of like get a better grip there as or ethnographers to kind of like really craft this out and share this through language?
Yeah, I think initially you've got to experience it yourself, right? So whether that's in a lived experience manner or whether that's in a forced experience, i.e. putting yourself into something like a workshop like mine, to be able to feel it within your own body is the first initial step, because you can't articulate in an autoethnographic way in a sensory-led principle unless you felt it yourself. So I would say put yourself in a blind space. It's as simple as that, because the ocular dominance of vision will take the rest of the senses away, because we are so ocular dominant. And by blindfolding yourself, you are then taking the distraction of vision away automatically. Yes. You're also putting yourself into a place of the unknown, and you're putting yourself into a place of fear. But that's not a bad thing, because it allows yourself to feel what's happening inside your body, right? So you're not just engaging through the other senses, through smell, through taste, through touch, and through sound. They are brought to the forefront. But what is really super interesting is how the senses inform and connect with the somatic sense that's happening inside your body. Why it could take you to, for example, whenever I smell a roast dinner, I go back to being like a 10-year-old on a Sunday, sitting around my mum and dad's dinner table, right? that's a memory. That's held memory in our body. So that memory plays a huge part of the meaning, what it means to me to then, take myself back to that actual lived experience. So memory is really, really important, I think, to be able to then articulate it through writing. So I would say it is all about literally taking the distraction of vision away and then allowing yourself and being open enough to see what else is going on in your body. Because once you tie all of those modalities together, once you tie the perception of the senses, the embodied knowledge, and the giving meaning through your emotional and your visceral responses, a picture is painted for you, and then you can articulate it in paper, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks so much. Really, really clearly answered. Thank you very much, Victoria. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. You're welcome.
So we have 3 more questions, and we'll see if we can get to all of them. Pat, you want to ask your question or make a comment? We still can't hear you. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, it's more of a comment than a question. And I also have to say, though you probably couldn't see this, Victoria, my cat Neville has very much enjoyed your presentation because
they are a beautiful sensory being. I'm a cat lover too. My cat's around somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I was really taken by what you said about post-traumatic growth. And I think that's a really important notion that we probably don't talk about as much as we talk about the stress that comes. So I want to thank you for raising that. I also want to say, I mean, you're incredibly talented with your sculpture, and you already were anyway. I wonder, I mean, I don't know, and I don't quite know how to articulate this without sounding offensive to somebody or other, but would it have been the same for you, do you think, had you not been so capable? Do you think your work is wonderful and other people recognize that? How far is that, do you think, part of your growth that's contributed to your growth, the fact that you are extremely talented?
I can't deny that the recognition, if you like, that I have received as an artist through the years hasn't played a part into that post-traumatic growth, because it has. Obviously it has, because when you're recognized as being skillful and talented and people enjoy your work, people have bought my work all over the world, and I've had collections such as in the House of Commons, and of course that gives a sense of recognition. However, one of my personal inquiries over the past 5 years is actually letting go of that recognition, because I've been somebody that has very much been about approval and people pleasing and all that kind of stuff as well. So the recognition part was something that I needed to let go of, because it was kind of holding me back in a way, because it wasn't allowing me to engage in my own process. And I teach this a lot with my students. I teach the importance of the process is far greater than the end result, the end product, and what actually how they produce the work, what they're feeling within themselves. The whole process of art making is far, far greater than what they're actually going to finish as a finished piece. So I think, I think it has been important to a degree, but I have since realised that actually art, regardless as to whether you're a successful commercial artist or you're somebody that just does it as a hobby, it's the importance of the process and how that can hold you and support you through any kind of adversity is probably the most important part of post-traumatic growth.
Okay, thank you. That's a wonderful response, and I very much enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Paraz.
Yes, just reiterating how deeply moving it has been to listen to you, Victoria, and be a part of this.
Thank
There
you.
was two things that really have landed with me. One of them was when you described the wood from the tree that you climbed as a child in your sculpture piece, Inner Child, and how you described the wood as itself having an embodied experience. And I have to say, my mind was completely blown by that. You know, just that nuanced sensitivity of the embodiment of the wood. I don't know if you want to, like, if we even have time to open that up, but I found that really, really beautiful. And the second thing was about just like the progressive sight loss, or that word progressive,
Yeah.
in that in each moment, as you mentioned, turning a loss into an opportunity, there was an opportunity to reevaluate how you are in time and space.
Yes.
You know, like I really got that sense of like all of us are constantly growing and constantly being imprinted. And then you had this like body landing experience of you are almost forced to see things differently over and over and over again. I mean, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's my two pieces. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll come to the first one. I'll try and keep this brief because, as you said, we could go into quite detailed theoreticals on this. But with embodiment, I believe that embodiment isn't just within the body, even though the word suggests it's the body. I believe it's in all living things, plants, trees, around our environment, grass. You know, I think that because there is growth within nature, that growth is embodiment in itself. And by interacting with that tree as a child, I am already kind of weaving and entangling my own embodiment into the tree. So the tree has the memory of my feet, you know, climbing up it and building my tree house and swinging from it and stuff, you know. So I think that is, you know, I'm never going to get to speak to that tree, and that tree's never going to get to go, hey, yeah, I got great memories. It'd be really cool if it could. But I think it's more of an understanding of how material thinking works. I mean, I've done quite a lot of work around material thinking, and, you know, how we interact with our environment imprints on not just ourselves, but it imprints on the environment as well. Does that make sense?
Victoria, I'm going to stop. We have one more question, and we have 2 minutes before the next session. So I'm going to ask Peter to just ask a quick question, make a quick comment, and you make a quick response.
Okay.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to be together. Thank you, Victoria, for what you shared. It's deeply inspiring to me. I'm a person who has cerebral palsy, which impacts my balance, stamina, and coordination, especially my lower extremities. What have you found to be the best ways to get into your body? And has that changed over time? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief. Somatic therapy, without a shadow of a doubt. Doing somatic therapy is something that has hugely influenced how I'm able to internalize and get in touch with my body. So yeah, that's probably the quickest answer I can give you. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Cheers.
Victoria, we could just go on and on and on. You are amazing, and the session was amazing. And
Thank you.
It is recorded, so it will be on the IANI website for people who did not get to see it. So pass on the information. And thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
You're more than welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Arthur.
Our pleasure.